General Zextar stood on the bridge of his command ship, looking out at the stars through the large viewing window. His green-scaled hands were clasped behind his back as he read the mission briefing on his datapad. After 300 years of military service across 14 different war zones, he thought he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. The reptilian general was tall and broad, with golden eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. His dark green scales bore the scars of many battles, and his uniform displayed medals from wars that most species had forgotten. He was considered one of the finest military minds in the hegemony fleet. Today's assignment seemed simple enough. The Galactic Council wanted him to observe a newly discovered species called humans during their current conflict with the Korthak Empire. It was standard procedure when a new species entered galactic politics. Someone had to evaluate their military capabilities and determine if they posed any threat to established civilizations. Zextar had done this job many times before. Most new species followed predictable patterns. They would fight bravely but foolishly, using outdated tactics and primitive weapons. After a few crushing defeats, they would either submit to stronger powers or be destroyed entirely. It was the natural order of things in the galaxy. The humans had been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. Their technology was crude and basic, compared to the advanced civilizations that dominated galactic politics. Their ships looked like floating scrap metal held together with hope and determination. Their weapons were simple projectile launchers and basic energy beams. By every measure that mattered, they should be easily defeated. The Korthak Empire had sent a large fleet to claim human territory. The Korthak were a proud warrior race with advanced technology and centuries of military experience. They had conquered dozens of worlds and destroyed many species that dared to resist them. Their ships were sleek and powerful, armed with plasma cannons and protected by energy shields that could deflect most known weapons. Zextar activated his ship's cloaking device and moved closer to observe the coming battle. His scout vessel was invisible to both human and Korthak sensors, allowing him to watch and record everything without being detected. He prepared his recording equipment and settled in to document what he expected would be a quick and decisive Korthak victory. The human fleet was gathering near a small planet called New Denver. Zextar counted their ships carefully. They had 12 cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 24 smaller fighters. The ships were old and patched, showing signs of hasty repairs and constant use. Many bore scorch marks from previous battles. Some appeared to be converted civilian vessels pressed into military service. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the human fleet from his flagship, a battered cruiser called the Hartford. The ship was nearly 50 years old and had been retrofitted so many times that it barely resembled its original design. Weapon mounts had been added wherever they would fit. Extra armor plating was welded over obvious weak points. The result was ugly but functional. Zextar listened in on human communications as they prepared for battle. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez was briefing her commanders in what humans called a strategy meeting. The general was surprised by how young they all looked. Most appeared to be in their 30s or 40s, which was barely adult by galactic standards. The Korthak fleet will arrive in 6 hours, Admiral Rodriguez said over the communication channel. Her voice was calm and professional, but Zextar could detect underlying tension. They outnumber us 3-1 and have superior firepower. Our ships are older and less advanced. By every tactical analysis, we should lose this fight badly. Lieutenant Commander Pete Johnson spoke up from his destroyer, the Austin. Admiral, our ammunition supplies are limited. We have enough heavy rounds for maybe 4 hours of sustained fighting. After that, we'll be down to emergency reserves and improvised weapons. Commander Amy Blake added her concerns from the cruiser Phoenix. Our shield generators are already running at maximum capacity just to maintain basic protection. The Korthak plasma weapons will cut through our defenses like paper. I estimate we can hold defensive positions for 6 hours at most before being overwhelmed. Zextar nodded approvingly as he recorded their conversation. At least these humans understood their situation clearly. They knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. They recognized that their technology was inferior. This showed intelligence and tactical awareness even if it would not save them from defeat. "So what's our plan, Admiral?" asked Captain Morrison from the Hartford. His voice carried a strange tone that Zextar could not quite identify. It was not fear or despair, as the general would have expected. It sounded almost eager. Admiral Rodriguez was quiet for a moment before responding. When she spoke, her words sent a chill down Zextar's spine that he could not explain. "Time to get creative." The simple phrase seemed to energize the entire human fleet. Voices became more animated on the communication channels. Officers began discussing ideas that made no sense to Zextar's trained military mind. They talked about using mining equipment as weapons, converting cargo containers into bombs, and turning civilian ships into battering rams. Colonel Sandra Brooks suggested using their medical facilities to create biological weapons from cleaning supplies. Engineer Tony Garcia proposed reprogramming maintenance robots to attack enemy ships. Pilot Nancy Clark recommended using their food replicators to manufacture explosive compounds. Every suggestion was met with enthusiasm rather than horror. These humans seemed to view the impossible odds as an exciting challenge rather than certain death. They discussed suicidal tactics with the same casual tone other species used to plan dinner menus. Zextar began to feel uncomfortable as he listened to their planning session. He had observed many species preparing for hopeless battles, but never with this strange combination of calm acceptance and creative enthusiasm. Most doomed civilizations either panicked or resigned themselves to fate. The humans were doing neither. The Korthak fleet arrived exactly on schedule. Their ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a display of military precision that had intimidated countless enemies. The fleet consisted of 36 vessels, including battle cruisers, destroyers, and fighter squadrons. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Commander Vorthak led the Korthak fleet from his flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet, as was traditional, before beginning combat. His message was simple and direct. "Human vessels, you are outmatched and will be destroyed. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Resist and you will suffer greatly before the inevitable end." Captain Morrison's response surprised both the Korthak commander and General Zextar. Instead of fear or anger, the human's voice carried amusement. "Commander Vorthak, thank you for the generous offer. However, we're going to have to decline, see? We humans have a saying about bringing knives to gunfights. The trick is making sure your knife is big enough." Zextar did not understand the reference, but something about the human captain's tone made him increasingly nervous. He had studied thousands of pre-battle communications, and this did not sound like the words of a defeated commander. It sounded like someone who knew a secret that others did not. The Korthak fleet moved into attack formation, preparing to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. Their plasma cannons began charging, and their shields powered up to maximum strength. Everything proceeded according to standard military doctrine. The human fleet responded by doing something that no tactical manual in the galaxy had ever described. Instead of forming defensive lines or attempting to retreat, the human ships scattered in completely random directions. Some flew toward the Korthak fleet, others moved away at odd angles, and several seemed to be heading toward nearby asteroids, for no apparent reason. General Zextar stared at his tactical display in confusion. Either the humans had completely panicked and lost all coordination, or they were implementing some strategy that he could not comprehend. Given their calm communications during the planning phase, panic seemed unlikely. As he watched the chaotic deployment of human forces, Zextar realized that his simple observation mission had become something far more complicated. These humans were not following any known rules of warfare. They were about to teach him lessons about combat that 3 centuries of military experience had not prepared him for. The battle began exactly as General Zextar expected. The Korthak fleet opened fire with their plasma cannons, sending bright beams of deadly energy across space toward the scattered human ships. The weapons were powerful enough to destroy most vessels with a single direct hit. This was standard military procedure, proven effective across countless battles throughout galactic history. What happened next defied every rule of warfare that Zextar had learned in 3 centuries of military service. Instead of trying to dodge the incoming fire or return shots with their own weapons, the human ships did something completely unexpected. Commander Ryan Phillips detached his destroyer from any formation and flew directly toward a nearby asteroid field. Not to hide behind the rocks for protection, but to start pushing the asteroids toward the Korthak fleet. Zextar watched in confusion as Phillips used his ship's mining equipment to break apart large asteroids and send the chunks flying toward the enemy. The rocks were not weapons in any traditional sense. They moved too slowly to cause serious damage and were too small to block enemy fire effectively. Yet Phillips continued his work with obvious purpose. "What is he doing?" Zextar muttered to himself as he recorded the strange behavior. No military academy in the galaxy taught asteroid manipulation as a valid combat technique. The answer became clear when the Korthak fleet moved to avoid the floating debris. Their perfect formation broke apart as ships maneuvered around the rocks. Some vessels had to reduce speed to navigate safely through the asteroid field. Others were forced to change course completely to maintain their attack positions. Phillips had not created weapons from the asteroids. He had created chaos in the enemy formation. The floating rocks were obstacles that forced the disciplined Korthak fleet to abandon their coordinated attack patterns. What had been a unified assault became a scattered collection of individual ship actions. While Phillips disrupted the enemy formation, Captain Laura Mitchell was implementing her own impossible plan. She had converted her cargo ship into something that no engineer would recognize. Mitchell was using the ship's industrial mining equipment to turn pieces of space junk into explosive devices. Old satellite parts, broken ship components, and discarded metal containers were being fitted with simple chemical explosives and proximity sensors. Mitchell's crew launched these improvised bombs into space where they drifted like harmless debris. When Korthak ships passed nearby, the hidden explosives detonated, causing damage to shields and hull plating. The Korthak commanders were becoming frustrated. Their advanced sensors could detect the explosions but could not identify the source. The human weapons did not match any known technology in their databases. Energy signatures were inconsistent, and the delivery methods made no tactical sense. Zextar realized that the humans were fighting a completely different kind of war. While the Korthak followed established military doctrine with predictable weapons and standard tactics, the humans were improvising solutions using whatever materials they had available. They were not bound by rules or traditions that limited their options. The most disturbing moment came when Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker volunteered his damaged cruiser for what humans called a kamikaze run. Parker's ship had taken heavy damage from Korthak plasma fire and was no longer capable of effective combat. Standard military procedure would be to evacuate the crew and abandon the vessel. Instead, Parker asked for volunteers to stay aboard and help him turn the ship into a massive bomb. The entire crew volunteered without hesitation. They began manually overriding safety systems and removing containment barriers around the ship's nuclear reactor. Their plan was to fly directly into the center of the Korthak formation and cause a reactor overload that would destroy multiple enemy vessels. What chilled Zextar to his core was not the sacrifice itself. Many species were willing to die for their cause when facing extinction. What disturbed him was how casually the other humans accepted this plan. There was no debate about the morality of suicide attacks, no discussion about alternative options, no emotional farewells or dramatic speeches. Captain Morrison simply said, "Good hunting, Steve," over the communication channel. Then he immediately began planning the next phase of attack as if sending people to certain death was just another routine tactical decision. As Parker's ship accelerated toward the enemy fleet, Zextar could hear the doomed crew singing something. They called country music over the open channel. They were actually enjoying themselves as they flew toward certain death. The songs were about home and family and simple pleasures, sung by people who would never experience any of those things again. The explosion when Parker's ship reached the Korthak formation was spectacular. The overloaded reactor created a blast that destroyed 2 enemy cruisers and seriously damaged 4 others. The tactical impact was significant, but the psychological effect on both the Korthak and Zextar was even greater. The Korthak commanders had never faced enemies who treated suicide attacks as casual tactical options. In their culture, death was something to be avoided through superior technology and overwhelming force. The idea of deliberately destroying your own ship and crew was completely alien to their way of thinking. While the Korthak fleet was still recovering from Parker's attack, Colonel Sandra Brooks implemented her own terrifying plan. She had converted her ship's medical bay into a biological weapons laboratory, using common cleaning supplies and medical chemicals to create deadly compounds. Brooks launched containers of her improvised biological agents into the path of incoming Korthak fighters. When the enemy ships flew through the chemical clouds, their air filtration systems became contaminated. The Korthak pilots began experiencing difficulty breathing and impaired vision. Several fighters crashed into each other or flew off course into asteroids. Again, Zextar was disturbed by how quickly humans could turn peaceful technology into instruments of destruction. Medical equipment designed to save lives became tools for biological warfare. Cleaning supplies meant for maintaining ship hygiene were converted into poison gas. The humans seemed capable of weaponizing anything within minutes. Engineer Tony Garcia demonstrated this ability when he reprogrammed the fleet's maintenance robots. These small machines were designed to perform routine repairs on ship systems. Garcia modified their programming and equipped them with simple explosive charges. The robots were then launched toward Korthak vessels where they attached to hull plating and detonated. The Korthak had no defense against this attack because their sensors were programmed to ignore small maintenance equipment. The robots were too tiny to be considered threats and too numerous to track individually. By the time the enemy realized what was happening, dozens of their ships had suffered hull breaches and system failures. Every human seemed to possess this same ability, to think outside established parameters. Pilot Nancy Clark used her fighter's communication array to broadcast false sensor readings that confused Korthak targeting systems. Cook Maria Santos converted her food preparation equipment into devices that generated electromagnetic pulses. Even the ship's janitor, Bob Wilson, contributed by using cleaning robots to spread metallic dust that interfered with enemy sensors. As the battle continued, Zextar began to understand that he was not observing conventional military tactics. The humans were not following any doctrine or strategy that could be taught in military academies. They were simply applying creative problem-solving skills to the challenge of defeating a superior enemy force. By the end of the first day of fighting, the numerically superior Korthak fleet was in full retreat. Their commanders were completely bewildered by human tactics that defied every principle of civilized warfare. Ships that should have been destroyed were still fighting. Weapons that should not exist were causing significant damage. Tactics that made no sense were proving devastatingly effective. Commander Vorthak sent a final transmission to the human fleet before withdrawing his forces. His voice carried confusion and growing fear rather than the arrogant confidence he had displayed at the beginning of the battle. Humans, your methods are unknown to us. We require time to study your capabilities and develop appropriate countermeasures. This engagement is concluded, but we will return with better preparation. Captain Morrison's response was typically human in its casualness. Commander, you're welcome to try again any time. We'll be here, and we're always learning new tricks. As the Korthak fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Zextar stared at his tactical recordings in stunned silence. Everything he thought he knew about warfare had been challenged in a single day. The humans had won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through sheer creative thinking and refusal to accept conventional limitations. The general realized that his simple observation mission had become something far more significant. He was witnessing the emergence of a species that could fundamentally change how wars were fought throughout the galaxy. The question was whether the rest of the civilized universe was prepared for such a revolution in military thinking. General Zextar could not sleep after witnessing the human victory over the Korthak fleet. The tactics he had observed defied everything he understood about warfare. He needed to learn more about these strange creatures who could turn cleaning supplies into biological weapons and maintenance robots into attack drones. 3 days after the battle, Zextar sent a formal request to Captain Morrison asking permission to board the human flagship for interviews. He claimed to be conducting routine observations for the Galactic Council, which was technically true. He did not mention that his Real purpose was to understand how humans could fight so effectively using methods that should not work. Captain Morrison agreed to the meeting with typical human casualness. "Sure, General. Come on aboard anytime. We'll show you around and answer any questions you have. Fair warning, though, the coffee is terrible and the food isn't much better." Zextar arrived at the Hartford in a small shuttle, still maintaining his cover as a neutral observer. The human ship looked even more damaged up close than it had during the battle. Scorch marks covered the hull where Korthak plasma beams had struck. Welded metal patches covered holes from previous fights. The entire vessel appeared to be held together by determination and spare parts. What shocked Zextar most was not the condition of the ship, but the age of the crew. These were not veteran soldiers hardened by decades of warfare. Most appeared to be barely out of their teenage years by galactic standards. They moved with the casual confidence of experienced warriors, but their faces showed the unmarked features of youth. Ensign Bobby Chen was the first crew member Zextar interviewed. The young human had single-handedly captured a Korthak battlecruiser during the recent battle using nothing but maintenance robots and industrial adhesive. When asked to explain his tactics, Chen seemed genuinely confused by the question. "I just used the same approach I learned fixing cars back home," Chen explained with a shrug. "When something big and complicated breaks down, you figure out which small parts are holding it together, and you mess with those instead. The Korthak ship had these intake vents that looked important, so I sent some robots to gum them up with adhesive. When their air circulation failed, they had to surrender or suffocate." Zextar stared at the young human in disbelief. This 22-year-old had defeated a warship carrying 300 experienced soldiers, using techniques he learned as a civilian mechanic. The tactical implications were staggering, but Chen seemed to view his achievement as nothing special. "Anyone could have done the same thing," Chen continued. "You just have to look at problems differently. Most people see a battlecruiser and think about big guns and thick armor. I see a machine that needs air circulation to function. Block the air, disable the machine. Simple." Sergeant Katie Lopez was equally disturbing in her casual attitude toward violence. She had created improvised weapons from kitchen utensils during the battle, turning forks and knives into deadly projectiles using the ship's magnetic launchers. When Zextar asked where she learned such skills, Lopez smiled cheerfully. "My dad took me camping a lot when I was a kid. He taught me that you can make tools and weapons from whatever you find lying around. A fork becomes a spear point. A knife becomes an arrowhead. A pot lid becomes a shield. When you're stuck in the wilderness, you learn to use everything available." The concept that humans taught their children to create weapons from household items was deeply unsettling to Zextar. Most civilized species kept military knowledge separate from civilian life. The idea that weapon making was considered a normal part of childhood education suggested a culture built around conflict. Chief Petty Officer Danny Wright provided another example of this disturbing pattern. Wright had successfully hacked into Korthak communication systems during the battle, causing confusion and misdirection among enemy forces. His background was not in military intelligence or computer warfare. "I used to deliver pizzas before joining the fleet," Wright explained with a grin. "Boring job, so I taught myself programming to pass the time. Started with simple stuff, then got into more advanced systems. Breaking into alien computers isn't that different from breaking into human ones. You just need to understand how they think." The casual way Wright described infiltrating enemy systems was frightening. He spoke about cyber warfare with the same tone someone might use to discuss a hobby. There was no recognition that his actions could determine the outcome of battles or the fate of entire civilizations. The most unsettling conversation was with Dr. Helen Carter, the ship's chief medical officer. She had developed 12 different ways to weaponize medical equipment during the battle, then immediately returned to treating wounded crew members with gentle care and compassion. "Medicine and warfare are closely related," Dr. Carter explained as she checked the vital signs of a patient. "Both require detailed knowledge of how bodies work. The difference is in application. I can use a scalpel to save a life or to end one. I can use anesthetic to prevent pain or to cause unconsciousness. Medical knowledge is just information. How you use that information depends on the situation. She spoke about creating biological weapons with the same calm professionalism she used when discussing treatment options for injured crew members. There was no moral conflict in her mind between healing and harming. Both were simply tools to be used when appropriate. Admiral Rodriguez noticed Zexitar's growing distress and offered to show him their basic training protocols. The holographic simulations revealed military doctrine that was built around the assumption that soldiers would need to fight without supplies, without support, and without hope of victory. Every human recruit learns to function in impossible situations, Rodriguez explained as they watched training scenarios. We assume that supply lines will be cut, communications will fail, and reinforcements will not arrive. Our people are trained to fight alone using whatever they can find. The training simulations showed scenarios that other species would consider hopeless. Soldiers were expected to create weapons from garbage, build shelters from debris, and develop battle plans, without any central coordination. What other militaries considered desperate last resort tactics, humans taught as standard operating procedure. But why? Zextar asked, genuinely confused. Your species has advanced technology and organized military forces. Why train as if you have nothing? Rodriguez looked at him with surprise. Because that's usually what happens in real wars. Equipment breaks down. Supply ships get destroyed. Communication systems fail. When everything goes wrong, you need people who can still fight effectively using nothing but their creativity and determination. The Admiral showed him more training footage of human soldiers learning to fight in environments that would kill most species. They practice combat in vacuum without proper suits, underwater without breathing equipment, and in toxic atmospheres without protective gear. They were taught to view any environment as potentially survivable, with enough creativity and willingness to accept risk. Zextar realized that human military doctrine was fundamentally different from every other species in the galaxy. Most armies were designed to function with adequate supplies, proper equipment, and reasonable expectations of survival. Human forces were designed to function when all of those things were gone. Your soldiers are trained to fight in conditions that would cause other armies to surrender immediately, Zexitar observed. That's the point, Rodriguez replied. If our people can fight effectively when everything is against them, they'll be unstoppable when conditions are favorable. Most of our enemies expect us to quit when things get difficult. They're usually wrong about that. As Zextar continued his interviews, he began to understand the source of human military effectiveness. It was not advanced technology or superior numbers. It was a culture that viewed impossible situations as interesting challenges rather than reasons to surrender. Engineer Tony Garcia summed up the human attitude perfectly when asked about his robot reprogramming tactics. Problems are just puzzles waiting to be solved. The bigger the problem, the more creative you have to be with the solution. Fighting a superior enemy force, that's just a really big puzzle. By the end of his visit to the Hartford, Zextar had reached a disturbing conclusion. The humans were not unusual because they had better weapons or more advanced technology. They were unusual because they refused to accept that any situation was completely hopeless. Where other species saw impossible odds, humans saw opportunities for creative solutions. This realization was more frightening than any weapon he had ever encountered in 3 centuries of warfare. 2 weeks after General Zextar completed his interviews aboard the Hartford, the Korthak Empire returned with reinforcements. Commander Vorthak had spent the time studying human tactics and developing countermeasures for their unconventional warfare methods. He brought a fleet 5 times larger than before and hired Vexian mercenaries to supplement his forces. The new Korthak battle plan was designed specifically to counter human creativity. They deployed sensor nets to detect improvised weapons, used multiple communication frequencies to prevent hacking attempts, and maintained loose formations to avoid the chaos tactics that had worked so effectively in the previous battle. Zextar observed the preparations from his cloaked scout ship, expecting to finally witness a conventional military engagement. The Korthak had learned from their mistakes and were approaching this battle with proper caution and preparation. Surely the humans would be forced to fight using standard tactics against such overwhelming force. He was completely wrong. Captain Morrison's response to the larger enemy fleet was to do something even more impossible than before. Instead of concentrating his forces for a defensive stand or attempting to retreat, he divided his small fleet into individual ships and sent them in completely different directions across 3 star systems. "All ships, you have your assignments," Morrison announced over the communication channel. "Rules of engagement are simple. Cause maximum chaos with whatever means necessary. No central coordination, no backup plans, no retreat options. Each ship is on its own to accomplish the mission using whatever methods seem appropriate." Zextar watched in horror as the human fleet scattered like debris from an explosion. There was no formation, no mutual support, and no apparent strategy. Each ship was essentially conducting its own private war against an enemy that outnumbered the entire human force by 50 to 1. Lieutenant Commander Carol Rivers took her science vessel, the Discovery, and began implementing a plan that made no logical sense. Instead of engaging enemy ships directly, she started spreading false sensor readings across 3 different star systems. Using her ship's advanced research equipment, Rivers created phantom fleets that appeared on Korthak sensors as massive human reinforcements. The fake signals were so convincing that Korthak commanders began repositioning their forces to counter threats that did not exist. Enemy ships chased sensor ghosts across empty space while Rivers remained safely hidden in an asteroid field, operating her deception from a distance. The enemy thinks they're fighting 3 separate human fleets in 3 different locations, Rivers reported cheerfully over the communication channel. Reality is somewhat different, but they don't seem to have figured that out yet. Commander Frank Bailey turned his cargo ship, the Birmingham, into a massive signal jammer that cut off enemy communications across half the sector. Bailey had converted his cargo containers into powerful transmission equipment that overwhelmed Korthak communication frequencies with random noise. When enemy fighters moved to destroy his ship, Bailey ejected his converted cargo containers into space. Each container was filled with metallic chaff and industrial chemicals that created an impenetrable cloud around his vessel. Korthak sensors could not penetrate the interference, and their weapons could not lock onto targets through the metallic fog. "I'm basically invisible now," Bailey reported with obvious satisfaction. "The enemy knows I'm here somewhere, but they can't find me to shoot at me. Meanwhile, their entire fleet is flying blind because they can't talk to each other." The breaking point for Zextar came when he witnessed Corporal Eddie Martinez accomplish something that should have been completely impossible. Martinez was a 19-year-old fighter pilot from Texas who had been stranded when his ship was damaged during the initial engagement. Instead of calling for rescue or trying to reach friendly forces, Martinez noticed that a nearby Korthak dreadnought had an exposed waste disposal port. Rather than fleeing from the massive enemy warship, the young human decided to fly his damaged fighter directly into the alien ship's sewage system. Zextar watched in stunned disbelief as Martinez guided his fighter through pipes filled with alien waste, using his ship's sensors to navigate toward the enemy vessel's reactor core. The teenager was humming something he called classic rock music, and occasionally pausing to take pictures with his personal communication device. "Hey everyone, check this out," Martinez announced over the open channel as he sent images of his journey through the Korthak ship's waste systems. "I'm literally swimming through alien sewage to save humanity. My mom is going to laugh so hard when she sees these photos." As Martinez worked his way through the disgusting environment toward his target, he provided a running commentary that made Zextar question his own sanity. The young human was treating a suicide mission through enemy waste systems as if it were an amusing adventure story. "The smell in here is absolutely terrible," Martinez reported cheerfully. "I think I'm going to need several showers when this is over. Oh wait, I probably won't survive this mission, so I guess the smell won't matter in the long run." When Martinez reached the enemy reactor core, he used his ship's emergency flares to cause a cascade failure in the alien power systems. The massive dreadnought lost all power and began drifting helplessly through space. 300 experienced Korthak warriors had been defeated by one teenager with emergency flares. "Mission accomplished," Martinez announced as his fighter was destroyed in the resulting explosion. "Tell my folks back home that I went out doing something really stupid, but effective. Also, remind them that I still think pineapple belongs on pizza no matter what anyone says." The casual way Martinez faced certain death while making jokes about food preferences was more disturbing to Zextar than any weapon he had ever encountered. This was not the behavior of a trained soldier following military doctrine. This was just how humans naturally responded to impossible situations. Lieutenant Sarah Phillips demonstrated similar behavior when she converted her medical transport into a psychological warfare platform. Using the ship's medical scanners, she analyzed Korthak brain activity patterns and began broadcasting frequencies that caused fear and confusion in enemy crews. "I'm basically giving the entire Korthak fleet anxiety attacks," Phillips explained over the communication channel. "Their stress levels are through the roof, and they're making mistakes because they can't think clearly. It's like being a therapist, except instead of helping people feel better, I'm making them feel much worse." The fact that a medical officer could weaponize therapeutic knowledge within hours of being asked was another example of the disturbing human ability to turn any expertise into a tool for warfare. Phillips had never been trained in psychological warfare, but she understood enough about brain function to improvise effective techniques. Pilot Kevin Anderson used his fighter to create what he called performance art by arranging destroyed enemy ships into patterns that spelled out rude messages in the Korthak language. The messages were visible to the entire enemy fleet and were apparently quite insulting based on their reactions. "I'm not just defeating them," Anderson explained proudly. "I'm defeating them in a way that will be remembered forever. Future generations of Korthak will tell stories about the day humans wrote curse words in space using their destroyed warships." By the end of the second day of fighting, the Korthak fleet was in complete disarray. Their communications were jammed. Their sensors were confused by false readings. Their commanders were suffering from anxiety attacks, and their most powerful warship had been destroyed by a teenager with emergency flares. Commander Vorthak sent a final transmission before ordering his forces to retreat. His voice carried a tone that Zextar had never heard from a military commander before. It was not anger or frustration. It was genuine fear. "Human forces, we do not understand your methods of warfare. Our tactical computers cannot predict your actions. Our strategies have no effect against your responses. We are withdrawing from this sector permanently. Please do not follow us." Captain Morrison's reply was typically human in its casual confidence. "Commander, we wouldn't dream of following you. We're too busy thinking up new ways to cause trouble right here. Safe travels, and maybe consider a different career path." As Zextar watched the Korthak fleet flee in complete disorder, he realized that he was witnessing something historically significant. The humans had not just won another battle. They had fundamentally broken an enemy's will to fight by using methods that made no sense according to any known military theory. That night, as Zextar reviewed his tactical recordings, he came to a terrifying conclusion. This was not human military doctrine at work. This was simply how humans approached any difficult problem. They refused to accept that limitations were real, and they treated impossible situations as opportunities for creative expression. The humans were not trying to be frightening. They were just being themselves, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. General Zextar sat in his command chair for 3 full days after witnessing the second human victory over the Korthak fleet. He stared at his tactical recordings and tried to write a report that would make sense to his superiors in the hegemony, high command. Every time he began writing, he realized how impossible his observations would sound to military leaders who had never witnessed human warfare. How could he explain that a teenager had destroyed a dreadnought by flying through sewage systems while humming music and taking photographs? How could he describe medical officers who created psychological weapons from therapeutic knowledge? How could he convince anyone that humans treated impossible odds as opportunities for creative entertainment? After his third failed attempt at writing a conventional military report, Zextar decided to send a much simpler message to his commanding officers. He opened a secure communication channel to Hegemony headquarters and composed what would be his final official transmission. "Hegemony High Command, this is General Zextar reporting on human military capabilities. After extensive observation, I have reached the following conclusion. The humans are not a military threat to be contained through conventional means. They are a force of nature that operates outside all known parameters of warfare. Recommend immediate diplomatic contact and alliance negotiations. These beings will either be our greatest allies or our worst enemies. There is no middle ground with this species. He attached his complete tactical recordings to the message, but knew that the data would be meaningless without context. The numbers and sensor readings could not convey the casual attitude humans displayed toward impossible situations. Statistics could not capture the creative thinking that turned cleaning supplies into biological weapons or maintenance robots into attack drones. Zextar concluded his report with a personal statement that ended his military career. I am resigning my commission effective immediately. After 3 centuries of service across 14 war zones, I have encountered something that changes everything I thought I knew about warfare. I will be seeking asylum on Earth to study human culture and psychology. If we are going to share the galaxy with these creatures, someone needs to understand how their minds work. Instead of setting course for hegemony space, Zextar directed his ship toward the small blue planet that had produced the most terrifying warriors he had ever encountered. If these humans were going to reshape galactic civilization through sheer creative chaos, he wanted to observe the process from a safe distance. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks, during which Zextar spent his time studying human cultural databases and trying to understand the society that created such unconventional fighters. What he discovered was even more disturbing than their military capabilities. Human children were taught to question authority, challenge assumptions, and find creative solutions to every problem. Their educational system rewarded original thinking over memorizing established procedures. Their entertainment media glorified individuals who succeeded by breaking rules and ignoring conventional wisdom. Most frightening of all, humans seemed to view failure as a learning opportunity rather than something to be avoided. They deliberately put themselves in difficult situations to test their abilities and develop new skills. Their culture actively encouraged the kind of risk-taking behavior that other species considered dangerous or insane. When Zextar reached Earth, he was greeted by Ambassador Julie Thompson at the orbital space station above North America. Ambassador Thompson was a former kindergarten teacher who had been assigned to handle first contact protocols because, according to her personnel file, she was experienced in dealing with beings who did not understand basic social rules. Welcome to Earth, General Zextar, Ambassador Thompson said with a warm smile. I understand you're interested in learning about human culture. Would you like some coffee? It's terrible, but it's traditional to offer it to visitors. The casual way she offered bad coffee to a military commander from an advanced alien civilization was perfectly representative of human behavior. They treated everything with the same comfortable informality, whether they were destroying enemy fleets or welcoming foreign dignitaries. When Zextar explained that he was seeking asylum because humans were too dangerous to fight against, Ambassador Thompson laughed and patted his arm in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting. Oh, honey, you haven't seen anything yet, she said with obvious amusement. Wait until you meet our teenagers. They're the ones who really break all the rules. Zextar was assigned to a cultural exchange program that placed him with a host family in a small town in Kansas. The family was chosen because they represented typical human civilian life, which the ambassador thought would help him understand how ordinary humans developed such extraordinary problem-solving abilities. Mr. Jim Patterson was a retired mechanic who had spent 40 years fixing broken machinery using whatever parts were available. Mrs. Betty Patterson was a librarian who collected information about everything from ancient history to advanced physics. Their teenage daughter, Nancy Peterson, was a high school student who built robots and explosives as hobby projects. On his first day with the Patterson family, Zextar was given a tour of their home and neighborhood. The experience was both fascinating and terrifying. Jim showed him the garage workshop where he repaired vehicles using improvised tools and creative solutions. The space was filled with machines that had been modified far beyond their original design specifications. The trick to fixing anything is understanding that the designer's intentions are just suggestions, Jim explained, as he showed Zextar an engine he had converted from gasoline to electric power using parts from 3 different manufacturers. If something doesn't work the way you need it to work, you change it until it does. Betty Patterson was equally disturbing in her casual approach to dangerous knowledge. Her personal library contained books on subjects ranging from nuclear physics to biological warfare, mixed in with cookbooks and romance novels. She treated information about deadly toxins with the same casual interest she showed for cake recipes. "I like learning about everything," Betty explained as she showed Zextar her collection. "You never know when random knowledge might come in handy. Last week I used a chemistry textbook to figure out how to remove a stain from Jim's work shirt. This morning I read about medieval siege tactics while planning our garden layout." The idea that humans collected dangerous knowledge as a hobby was deeply unsettling to Zextar. Most civilized species kept weapons information restricted to military specialists. The Patterson family treated explosives formulas and poison recipes as casual reading material. Nancy Peterson was the most frightening of all. At 16 years old, she had already built a working nuclear reactor in the family garage as a science fair project. When Zextar expressed concern about the safety implications, Nancy looked genuinely confused. "It's perfectly safe as long as you follow basic radiation procedures," she said while adjusting some component that Zextar could not identify. "I got the design from a physics textbook and improved it using some ideas I found online. The hard part was getting the uranium, but my chemistry teacher helped me extract it from old smoke detectors." The casual way she discussed uranium extraction and reactor design was typical of human teenagers, according to her parents. They were proud of their daughter's scientific achievements and saw nothing unusual about a child building nuclear devices as entertainment. "Nancy has always been interested in how things work," Betty explained. "Last year she built a particle accelerator for the school science competition. Next year she wants to try genetic engineering. We encourage her curiosity because learning should be fun." By his second month on Earth, Zextar had established a small consulting business helping other alien refugees understand human psychology. Word had spread through diplomatic channels that humans were impossible to fight against, and other species were seeking advice on how to avoid conflicts with this dangerous civilization. His first rule for survival was simple: never assume humans cannot do something just because it seems impossible. They do not understand the concept of impossible. They view limitations as problems to be solved rather than facts to be accepted. The business was quite successful. Within a year, Zextar had helped establish the first alien-human cultural exchange center, dedicated to teaching visiting species the fundamental truths about human civilization. Humans did not have the most advanced technology in the galaxy. They did not possess superior physical capabilities or overwhelming military forces. What made them unstoppable was their complete refusal to accept that any situation was hopeless or any problem was unsolvable. They treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. They viewed enemy superiority as an interesting challenge rather than a reason to surrender. Most importantly, they raised their children to question everything and create original solutions to every problem they encountered. In his memoirs, published 5 years after arriving on Earth, Zextar wrote his final assessment of human civilization. "These beings do not conquer through force or technology. They reshape reality through sheer determination and creative thinking.